2 in the morning, somewhere on Interstate 90 outside Buffalo, New York. The snow isn't falling anymore, it's flying sideways, and it's moving so fast that the headlights 40 feet away look like they're underwater. The wind chill reads negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility is 0. Not low, 0. You could hold your hand 6 inches from your own face and lose it in the white. And parked along that shoulder, engines running, marker lights glowing orange through the whiteout, are 11 long-haul trucks that haven't moved in 14 hours. Somewhere behind them, buried under 3 feet of drifting snow, are 2 more that got there first and never got out. This is December 2022. This is Winter Storm Elliott, one of the deadliest blizzards to hit the United States in a generation, and it froze the entire Buffalo region into stillness in under 6 hours. Here's the part that should confuse you. Rescue crews eventually reached that stretch of highway. National Guard Humvees came through with warm cabins and hot food. And more than one trucker looked at the offer, looked at the empty seat waiting for him, and said no. He stayed in his cab. In the middle of a federally declared disaster, with an escape sitting 3 feet away, he chose to stay exactly where he was. That single decision is the whole story tonight. Because this isn't just about Elliott. This has happened in the blizzard of '78 that froze Ohio solid enough to walk on, shutting down the entire Ohio Turnpike and stranding thousands of vehicles, trucks included, for 2 straight days. It happened in the Groundhog Day Blizzard of 2011, when truckers on Interstate 65 in Kentucky sat trapped for over 19 hours in a single frozen line of steel that stretched for miles, engines running, nobody moving an inch. It happened in the storm of the century in 1993, a storm so enormous it dropped snow in Alabama and snapped pine trees in Georgia, closing interstates across 18 states at once. Every single time, long-haul drivers had a version of the same choice these storms handed them, and almost every single time they made the same decision. They stayed in the cab. The scale of these storms is worth sitting with for a second, because it's easy to hear the word blizzard and picture something almost cozy, a heavy snowfall, a snow day, a school closing. That is not what any of these storms were. The blizzard of '78 buried parts of the Midwest under snowdrifts that reached the rooftops of one-story houses. Winter Storm Elliott dropped the wind chill in Buffalo to nearly negative 40 in a matter of hours and killed more than 3 dozen people in that county alone, many of them found in or near vehicles that had simply stopped moving. These are not exaggerated stories truckers tell to sound tough around a truck stop counter. These are federally declared disasters, and the trucks parked inside them are sitting at ground zero. Most people watching from a warm living room assume this is desperation. A man with no better option, gritting his teeth, surviving because he has to. That assumption is wrong, and by the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why it's wrong. There are 3 things going on inside that frozen cab that no news broadcast ever explains. The first is a trap built out of steel, physics, and federal law that makes leaving almost impossible. The second is a hidden survival system running under that hood that most drivers will never even describe to their own families. And the third is a psychological truth that flips this entire story upside down, because staying in that truck, in weather that kills the unprepared in under 10 minutes, isn't the tragedy. For a lot of these drivers, it's the safest, calmest place on the entire eastern seaboard. Let's start with the trap, because until you understand it, nothing else in this story makes any sense. A fully loaded Class 8 truck with a 53-foot trailer weighs roughly 80,000 pounds and stretches almost 75 feet from bumper to bumper. In good conditions, on dry pavement, that rig needs close to 600 feet to stop from highway speed. Now take away the pavement. Add 2 inches of ice under 6 inches of snow. Add wind gusts strong enough to push a loaded trailer sideways, and that same truck becomes something closer to a battering ram with no brakes at all. This is not an exaggeration truckers use to sound tough. It is basic physics that state troopers have watched play out in ditches for decades. When a blizzard like the one that hit Buffalo drops visibility to nothing and turns the road into glass, a semi-truck cannot simply pull off and creep towards safety the way a car can. Every movement risks a jackknife, and a jackknife trailer on an interstate during a storm doesn't just endanger the driver, it can seal the entire highway shut behind him, trapping every vehicle for miles. That's why, in nearly every one of these historic storms, the very first thing state authorities do is shut the interstate down completely. During the blizzard of '78, Ohio's governor closed every major highway in the state and made it a criminal offense to drive on them. During Winter Storm Elliott, New York issued a travel ban across 10 counties with real legal penalties attached. Once that ban goes into effect, a trucker isn't choosing to stay parked out of stubbornness. He is legally required to stay parked. Pulling back onto that highway isn't brave. It's a violation that can cost him his commercial license permanently. There's a smaller, quieter version of this same trap that plays out every winter on mountain passes long before a full blizzard even arrives. Places like Donner Pass on Interstate 80 in the Sierra Nevada enforce chain laws the moment snowfall starts, meaning a truck without tire chains fitted correctly simply isn't allowed through, storm or no storm. Officers stationed at chain-up stations will turn a rig around on the spot, so even outside a headline making disaster, a huge number of long-haul drivers are already living under rules that can freeze them in place for hours before the worst of any storm even lands. By the time a storm reaches Elliott-level intensity, that same driver isn't just facing new restrictions, he's often already been sitting still for half a day, engine running, watching the sky get worse. Then there's the second half of the trap, the part almost nobody outside the industry ever thinks about. That trailer behind the cab isn't empty space, it's cargo, and under federal regulations, that cargo is the driver's legal responsibility from the second he signs for it until the second he hands it off. Groceries, medical supplies. In more than one blizzard story from the last decade, insulin shipments racing against a storm to reach a hospital before the roads closed. If a driver abandons that trailer on the shoulder to walk to a warm shelter and something happens to the load, theft, spoilage, an accident involving an unattended vehicle, he is the one who answers for it. His insurance can be voided. His employer can hold him liable. His career, built over years, can end over a decision that took him 30 seconds to make in a moment of panic. So the math becomes brutally simple. He cannot legally drive. He cannot legally or professionally walk away. The truck is not a trap by accident. It is the only structure left standing once the storm has closed every other option, and for a driver who understands that, staying inside it isn't giving up. It's the only move that's actually left on the board. But here's where the story takes its first real turn, the part almost no news segment ever gets to. Even when rescue arrives, even when the National Guard rolls up with a warm truck and an open door, plenty of drivers still say no. That contradicts everything you just heard. If the trap is what's keeping them there, why refuse an actual way out? The answer is that somewhere between the blizzard closing in and the rescue truck arriving, that cab stopped being a trap and became something else entirely. And that transformation runs on technology most people driving past on a summer afternoon have never once noticed. Every serious long-haul sleeper cab is built around a second, quieter power system that has nothing to do with the diesel engine up front. Most people assume that if a trucker wants heat in a blizzard, he simply idles the main engine all night. In 38 states, that's flatly illegal. Idling laws cap how long a diesel engine can run without moving, with fines that hit $1,500 in some states and climb past $10,000 in California. Even where it is legal, idling a 400-horsepower engine for 8 straight hours burns close to 1.5 gallons of fuel every hour, which adds up to real money across a single winter, and more importantly, it isn't always available. Fuel gets short fast when an interstate is shut down for 2 straight days, and nobody can resupply the pumps. So the industry built something smaller. Tucked behind the passenger side fuel tank, in a box roughly the size of a briefcase, sits what's called an auxiliary power unit, a battery-driven system paired with a tiny direct-fired heater that can push out over 10,000 BTUs of warm air while sipping barely 1/10 of a gallon of fuel per hour. It doesn't heat the whole cab. It doesn't need to. Insulated ducts run that heat straight to the base of the sleeper bunk, and because warm air rises naturally, it forms a pocket of heat around the driver's body while the empty space up front by the windshield stays cold. It's not comfort for its own sake. It's engineering built for exactly the kind of night Buffalo just went through. And when that system fails, and in weather cold enough to crack a rubber gasket in under an hour, it does fail sometimes, there's a backup running underneath it. A driver named Hollis, who's run the northern tier from Erie to the Dakotas for 11 winters, described the night his auxiliary unit died during Winter Storm Elliott. He woke up at 4 in the morning to total silence, no fan hum, no compressor cycle. The display on his heater was dark, and the cab had already dropped to 12 degrees and was still falling. He had two choices in front of him: start the main engine and risk both the idling fine and a diesel gel up in temperatures that cold, or reach under the bunk for the second system almost every winter experienced driver carries and few outsiders have ever heard of. A direct-fire diesel bunk heater no bigger than a coffee can, wired straight to a standalone battery, drawing fuel through its own separate line. He flipped the switch. He heard the fuel pump start its steady click once every second. Warm air was back within 20 seconds. He was asleep again in under 5 minutes. That rhythmic click became something else to him that night, and to almost every long-haul driver who has lived through a storm like that one. It stopped being the mechanical sound and became a kind of proof of life. One click a second means fuel is flowing and heat is being made. Silence means something has gone wrong and it's time to act. Hollis put it simply. You don't fear the cold out there, he said. You fear the sound of the fan stopping. But there's a detail from a different storm entirely that might be the strangest part of this whole system. And it comes from the Groundhog Day Blizzard of 2011, out on that frozen stretch of Interstate 65 in Kentucky. A driver named Dana, who'd been hauling refrigerated freight for 6 years by that point, spent 19 hours parked in that line without ever once needing to open her door. What she remembered most, years later, wasn't the cold. It was the quiet. At those temperatures, with that much fresh snow blanketing the ground, sound behaves differently. It gets swallowed. No highway hum, no distant traffic, nothing bouncing off pavement. Just the occasional muffled thump of snow sliding off a neighboring trailer, and underneath it, the steady, almost heartbeat-like tick of her own bunk heater's fuel pump. She said it was the quietest 19 hours of her entire life, and somewhere around hour 11, she stopped being afraid and just started being still. Now, here's the part of this story that actually changes everything. The reason all of this matters more than a list of parts and wiring diagrams. Ask any veteran driver who has weathered one of these storms whether they'd trade that frozen, isolated cab for a warm hotel room down the road, and most of them will tell you no. Not eventually. Not after some negotiating. Just no. And the reason has almost nothing to do with money or convenience. It's about control. Inside a hotel during a regional blizzard evacuation, you are, whether you like it or not, one more displaced stranger among hundreds. You don't control the thermostat. Some algorithm dims at 2 in the morning to save energy. You don't control the family in the next room running the television until dawn, or the front desk clerk who can't tell you when or if the highway will reopen. You are, functionally, a passenger in someone else's emergency plan. Inside that truck cab at -15 degrees, a driver controls the temperature down to the exact degree. He controls the fan speed, the lighting, the radial, the schedule. In the middle of a disaster large enough to shut down an entire region, that cab becomes the one square footage on the whole map where he is still completely in charge of his own outcome. One driver who runs fuel tankers through the Dakotas put it this way after riding out a whiteout alone for 2 days straight. "In a hotel," she said, "I'm a stranger waiting for someone else to fix things. In my cab, I already know exactly what's fixed and what isn't. That's not fear. That's the closest thing to peace you can find in the middle of a federal disaster zone." There's a strange kind of pride that comes with that control too, one that almost never makes it into news coverage of these storms. Ask a driver who rode out Elliott or the '78 Blizzard or that 19-hour stretch on I-65 whether they'd call the experience traumatic, and plenty of them will surprise you by saying no. Some will even tell you they'd do it again. Not because the cold was pleasant, but because surviving it entirely on their own terms, with equipment they maintained themselves and decisions they made themselves, left them with something a hotel room never could. Dana, the driver from that Kentucky stretch of highway, put it plainly when she talked about it years later. "In a hotel," she said, "you're a guest waiting for someone else to tell you it's safe to leave. Out there, I already knew everything that mattered. My fuel, my battery, my heat. Nobody had to tell me anything." That peace doesn't happen by accident, and this is where the story earns its second turn, because comfort in weather this extreme takes weeks of preparation. Most drivers start building the moment the calendar hits October. Ordinary diesel fuel begins forming wax crystals around 20 degrees Fahrenheit and turns into something close to a slushy at sharply colder temperatures, which is enough to choke a fuel line and strand a truck permanently. So experienced cold weather drivers add anti-gel treatment to every single fill-up starting in the fall, and most of them carry a bottle of emergency fuel additive, specifically for the moment a filter starts icing up on the road. At the same temperatures, a standard lead-acid starting battery loses well over half its cranking power, which is why serious long-haul drivers running the northern routes have started switching to lithium-ion batteries that hold on to more than 90% of their output, even deep into negative numbers. They cost roughly 6 times more than the standard version, and every driver who's had to restart a frozen truck at 5 in the morning will tell you it's worth every extra dollar. Chains matter here too, and not just for the driving that happens before a road closes. Experienced cold weather drivers keep a full set inspected and ready in an accessible compartment all winter long, because when a plow finally does come through and the highway reopens hours or days later, the difference between rolling forward immediately and sitting stranded another 6 hours waiting on a tow can come down to whether those chains are ready to go or buried under cargo in the back. And every driver who runs any kind of secondary heater in an enclosed cab knows the one rule that overrides everything else: proper ventilation. A cracked window, even half an inch, isn't optional in a sealed metal box burning fuel all night. It's the line between staying warm and a carbon monoxide risk that experienced drivers are trained to respect without exception. Then there's the cheapest fix in the entire arsenal, and arguably the most effective one. A thick, insulated curtain that snaps onto a track directly behind the driver's seat, sealing the sleeper berth off from the windshield area completely. Close that curtain, and the front of the cab can sit at freezing while the sleeping area behind it holds steady near 70 degrees, cutting the heater's workload by more than half. Add foil-backed insulation taped over every window, because a single pane of glass bleeds heat roughly 10 times faster than an insulated wall, and you have a survival setup that costs less than $100 total and can be the difference between a cold but manageable night and real danger. None of it looks impressive from the outside. From the outside, it's just a windshield covered in silver foil and a curtain pulled shut behind a dark cab on the shoulder of a closed interstate. From the inside, it's the reason a driver sleeps through a night that would put an unprepared person in the hospital within the hour. And here's the layer almost nobody who hasn't lived it ever expects: the final piece of why these drivers aren't the isolated, desperate figures they look like from a passing car. When a line of trucks parks together during a storm like this, they aren't just clustered for the shelter of each other's trailers. They're building a network. Every one of those cabs has a CB radio, and while Channel 19 runs the ordinary highway chatter, plenty of veteran drivers switch to a different channel once the storm shuts everything else down, an unofficial line reserved for exactly nights like this one. "Anybody's heater acting up?" somebody asks. "Battery bank's reading low over on the East End." Somebody else answers back that they've got a spare bottle of anti-gel if anyone needs it before their tank freezes solid. It is a decentralized, leaderless support system built entirely out of drivers talking other drivers through the same physics problem, with no dispatcher, no hotel manager, no one but each other. That network runs on trust, built over years, not minutes. Plenty of these drivers have never met each other in person, don't know each other's full names, wouldn't recognize each other's faces at a truck stop counter in July. All they know is a voice, a call sign, and a shared understanding of what it takes to survive a night like this one. Somebody with a spare bunk heater part will drive it down 3 trucks if they have to, because next month, in a different storm, on a different stretch of highway, the favor gets returned without anyone keeping score. It's the closest thing the industry has to a formal safety net, and it exists entirely off the books, running on nothing but channel space and decades of shared experience. And in the middle of a blizzard that shut down an entire metropolitan region, something almost nobody expects starts happening on that channel. They start joking. During one of the coldest nights of Winter Storm Elliott, with drifts burying half the trucks on that stretch of I-90, one driver reportedly broke the silence on the radio to mention that the truck stop across the frozen lot had working showers and a hot food counter if anyone wanted to attempt the walk. Somebody else came back immediately, dry as ice itself, asking if that included a ride there, because he wasn't setting one boot outside for anything short of an emergency. The whole channel laughed. Then everyone went quiet again and went back to sleep, warm, safe, and entirely unbothered by a storm that was, at that very moment, one of the deadliest in the country's recent history. So the next time footage comes across your feed of a line of trucks buried in snow on some interstate shoulder, resist the urge to feel sorry for them. What you're actually looking at is a driver running redundant, battery-powered heating systems, treated fuel lines, lithium-starting batteries, insulated curtains, and a live radio network of other professionals checking in on him in real time. He is warmer than you assume. He is safer than the headline suggests. And on more than one of these historic nights, from Ohio in 1978 to Kentucky in 2011 to Buffalo in 2022, more than a few of them slept better, wrapped in that quiet, self-built shelter, than plenty of people did in the hotel's advertising vacancy just a few hundred feet away. If you're a driver who's ridden out one of these storms yourself, tell me the coldest night you've ever slept through in that cab, and whether your setup held or gave out on you, because I read every single one of these comments. And if you're watching this from somewhere warm right now, look up how cold it actually got outside during whichever storm you remember most, then imagine adding another 30 or 40 degrees below that, because that's the kind of night these drivers were living through while the rest of the country watched the forecast from the couch. Drop the coldest weather you've personally been through down in the comments below. If this pulled back the curtain on something you had genuinely never thought about before, hit that like button, because it helps put this story in front of more people who drive past these trucks every single winter without ever knowing what's really happening inside them. Subscribe for more and stay warm out there.